Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to talk about the new proposed culturally responsive education standards from the Illinois State Board of Education. And we're also going to discuss how the Joint Committee for Administrative Rules works. The Joint Committee for Administrative Rules, which is known by its acronym JCAR, is what is reviewing these new standards from the Illinois State Board of Education. So tonight, for the next hour or so, or as long as we have interests and questions, Ted and I are going to be discussing both the proposed rule and also how the process is going to work at JCAR. My name is Paul Schimpf. I'm a former state senator in Illinois. I live down in Monroe County, which is in the Metro East. And the last 2 years of my term in the Illinois Senate, I served as a member on the Joint Committee for Administrative Rules, known by its acronym as JCAR. So thank you for joining us tonight. I want to very quickly give my co-host Ted an opportunity to introduce himself right now.
Ted Dabrowski at WirePoints, and at WirePoints we're a research and policy group, and we're working hard to make Illinois a state where people want to stay, where they want to make Illinois a destination state, where rather than leaving the state to find opportunities outside of the borders, people want to stay here, that set up their entrepreneurial shops here and get investment.
Set the timer for 1 hour.
I believe that can happen, but right now we're headed the wrong direction, and tonight's discussion is precisely one of those things that would chase a lot of Illinoisans away. So we're happy to talk about it, educate the public about it, and of course, teach all of us to speak up and push back against things that we think are wrong for our country or our state.
Well, you're absolutely correct in that there have been so many comments and messages that I've received on Facebook where people just say, look, if this goes through, I'm leaving Illinois, or I'm a teacher and I cannot teach under these proposed rules in Illinois, I will leave. And really, the biggest stat that is really going to determine the future of our state is whether people want to come here and raise their families and be successful with their businesses, or whether they are looking to leave our state. And right now, we've had record levels of people exiting the state of Illinois, and we simply cannot solve any of the challenges that our state faces unless people want to come to Illinois and raise their families and have their careers here. So you are spot on about that. I think what I want to talk about first before we get into the rule itself is I really need to explain what JCAR is and how it works. Now, if you're watching this and you've never heard of JCAR or you don't understand it, don't feel bad. There are journalists who have been covering Illinois government for decades who don't understand what JCAR is and what it does. JCAR is not your typical legislative committee. JCAR is what I would call a process committee, not a policy committee. And I will explain that, what I mean by that in a couple minutes. But before I get into that, we really need to understand what kind of law we are talking about right now. If you go to the driver's license office to get your Illinois driver's license, or if you file a request to get like a hunting permit, what you are operating under is not statutory law. You are operating under administrative law. The process that we all are familiar with, when we used to watch those, Schoolhouse Rock videos about, how a bill becomes a law, that really is only half of the process, because once a bill is passed and the governor signs it and it's a law, then the administrative agencies have to step up and really draft the rules that we as citizens operate under. So, for instance, when the state of Illinois legalized the farming of hemp a couple years ago, it was up to the Illinois Department of Agriculture to set up the rules by which people could get permits and start farming hemp. So JCAR, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, is really a check and balance to make sure that administrative agencies are following statutory intent, they're complying with what is already in the statute, and that they are also following what's called the Illinois Administrative Procedures Act. So JCAR is really a way for the Illinois legislature to make sure that the administrative agencies are just not going contrary to existing statutory law, or that they're not just going beyond the authority they have and taking the authority away from the General Assembly, basically making decisions that should be left to the Illinois legislature. So that's why I say that this is a process committee, not a policy committee, because what JCAR does, because it's a check and balance, JCAR is voting to see whether administrative rules that have been drafted up comply with the Illinois statutes and the laws that exist in Illinois. Now, what's important about that is that means that JCAR members are not going to be voting on whether or not they think this rule is a good idea policy-wise. The best example I can give to that point is we have this thing in Illinois now called the gun dealer licensing regulations, which that passed a couple years ago. It was very, very controversial. I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment, and I voted against the gun dealer licensing law 7 times while I was in the General Assembly because, you know, it passed, it got vetoed, it got brought back up again, it went to subcommittees, but I voted against this in the General Assembly 7 different times. When it finally made it to JCAR, what I was voting on at that point was whether or not the rules that the Illinois State Police had drafted complied with the statute. And I did negotiate at that point with the Illinois State Police to make sure that I felt that they were within what had been set up by statute, and that they weren't going beyond what the statute gave them the authority to do. And eventually the state police made changes, and I wound up allowing those gun dealer licensing regulations to move through JCAR. They were approved by JCAR. But the important thing to understand is, you know, when JCAR takes this up on, I think the scheduled date is Tuesday, the 16th of February, when JCAR takes these rules up, those rules will have a presumption that they are valid. And the only thing that JCAR can do is JCAR can say, you know what, we don't think these comply with Illinois statute. We don't think that they are reasonable, or we think that they infringe upon the prerogatives of the legislature. And if JCAR believes that, JCAR can strike the rule down, which is called a suspension. But in order for JCAR to do that, you have to have 8 out of 12 JCAR members voting for the suspension. Now, JCAR is made up of 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, so one party alone can never suspend a rule. You have to have 8 of the 12 committee members saying, look, we think that this rule is just so bad that we are willing to strike it down. So that's what's going to happen on Tuesday when these new rules come before the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. So that's a little bit of the background. One of the things that I have, one of the new rules that I have for myself is I will not try to explain JCAR to anybody on a radio interview anymore, just because it's too difficult. But we're here on a Facebook Live session, so if what I've said didn't make a lot of sense, I'm happy to answer some more questions or go into a little bit of detail. Later on in the discussion, since I was a member of JCAR, I want to tell you what I think the best ways are to persuade the members of JCAR. If you think that a rule needs to be struck down, I'm going to tell you the best ways that I think you can contact and convince them of that fact. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to Ted, because I've been talking for quite a bit, and I'll let Ted talk a little bit about what is actually in this latest rule that is being proposed by the Illinois State Board of Education.
At Wire Points, we typically focus on financial issues, budget issues, but we do all that because we care about Illinois and we want to see Illinois be a thriving place. And as I mentioned, this kind of law can do the reverse. It can chase more people out of Illinois, lower the tax base, make all the problems that Illinois has even worse. And so this is why a group like WirePoints is speaking up. This is also a free speech issue, a First Amendment rights issue, and we think it's critical. But I think when you look at it just from a personal family perspective, and I'm a parent. I've got 4 kids, one still in high school, and this is really a question about schools not teaching our kids how to think, but now our schools teaching our kids what to think, and that's the real problem. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on, left or right. You shouldn't want anybody teaching your kids or trying to push political thoughts. And we'll talk about them in a second, but these are very strong political thoughts on our kids. We want them to hear all sides of things. We want them to be able to debate and critically think. But we certainly don't want them to be shoved down with political thoughts that might not meet our needs. I certainly want those kind of things. I want to teach my kids at the kitchen table, at home, those kind of values. And so, look, every state has to have rules on how its teachers are certified, how they should teach, what they should know. And a lot of the rules that are being proposed are those typical things, right? A teacher should evaluate oneself, understand how they fit in the classroom. They must understand the different kids that are in the classroom, where they come from, who's got problems, who's, different backgrounds. Of course, that's obvious, and any good teacher will want to do that without being told. It's just it's an obvious thing. But these rules now go so far that they start to put in all kinds of language, and you'll hear the language. We'll talk about it. Language that is heavily political, based around critical race theory, and we can talk a little bit about that. And it creates a political litmus test. So the rules in specific are about teacher certification. And these are the things that for a teacher to get certified in Illinois, they must know, must do, and follow. And of course, we're hearing from ISB, they're saying, well, we're not talking about curriculum. We're not talking about what happens in the high schools and the elementary schools. This is only teacher certification in the college programs. But we all know that if all the teachers are certified over a 15-year period, if they're all certified under certain rules that we might find offensive or against our beliefs, then in 15 years, the whole system and the curriculum will start to match that. So I don't think we're that naive to believe what ISB's saying. So let's talk a little bit about what's in there. This is the core language that I think caught a lot of people's attention, and I'm looking at the actual language here. They caught a lot of attention about how it politicizes education. It says the culturally responsible teacher will embrace and encourage progressive viewpoints and perspectives. That's fascinating. And again, I say I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. You could flip that and make it conservative. You shouldn't want the teachers pushing those kind of things because you just don't know what their agenda is.
Let me interject.
Sure.
Just for a second. I mean, could you imagine the uproar and outcry there would be, if that language had been swapped out? If you had language in there saying that teachers will teach conservative viewpoints. I do know, and this isn't the subject of this Facebook Live session tonight, but the CNN called the 1776 project that President Trump had going before he left office. CNN flat out said that is racist. So there is, if this language, if these standards had conservative in there instead of progressive, which really is a synonym for Democrat at this point, if it had said conservative, and if you had the conservative viewpoints and language, people would be lighting themselves on fire over this.
And it should concern anybody. And I'll tell you another reason to be concerned is that we know in Illinois right now is more Democrat, as we know more recently with the supermajorities. But we know that politics shift. And at some point you may like the politics of who's making the rules, but in the future you may not like the politics of who are making the rules. And I don't think that our classrooms and our children should ever be political football, so that when Republicans win, it becomes that, this politics in the classroom, and then when the Democrats win, it becomes this. That's just wrong. I don't want that, and so as a parent, I don't want that, and I think most people wouldn't.
Well, the thing that's frustrating too is it's not like you mentioned that there already is a teacher accreditation process in Illinois. Uh, this new proposed set of rules is replacing rules that already exist, and the rules that already exist talk about how you need to subject students to different viewpoints, and we need to nurture students so that they will be good citizens. If I was still on JCAR, one of the things that I would be asking ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education, is why, when there are so many other pressing challenges right now, why are you expending all this effort to replace a certification process that I think is perfectly acceptable?
Right. So let me go over a few things that are in the language that I think build a little bit more. For me, and you may comment on this as well, Paul, one of the big lines there talks about there's systems of oppression. And culturally responsive teachers and leaders understand that there are systems in our society that create and reinforce inequities, thereby creating oppressive conditions. So anybody who hasn't looked at critical race theory, there's a lot of discussion about, in the classrooms, we're going to point out who the victims are in our classrooms and who the oppressors are. And I certainly don't want, and I think most parents don't want any teachers trying to define some kids as victims and making them feel bad or make them feel, well, how they should feel, right? I think life is already hard. Being a kid is already hard. Being a student is already demanding. There's bullying, there's the socialization. It's all complex. For a teacher to stand up and say that you're a victim, I would never want my kid to feel that. Likewise, I don't want a teacher telling my child that he or she is an oppressor, and that you're historically from an oppressive group, and so I think that just categorizes a classroom in a horrible way. And don't think that stuff won't happen in the classrooms. There's a big deal coming out of Cupertino about a third grade teacher who asked the kids to divide themselves in that way. And when you read the next line that comes up, I shouldn't say the next line, but the next line I'm pointing out, the culturally responsive teacher and leader will create a risk-taking space that promotes student activism. So here you're talking about systems of oppression, progressive viewpoints, and now you're talking about activism. Again, very dangerous. Kids need to be learning how to do math and reading and science, and we'll talk about the results in the Illinois schools. They're not good. What they shouldn't be doing is spending their time doing activism, especially if we follow through on this, progressive activism. And again, I want to repeat, I don't want any political side. So I wouldn't want them doing conservative activism in the classroom. That's not the place for this kind of stuff.
Well, I think too, what this goes to is the Illinois State Board of Education is really, when they are putting this in place, they are making changes to the type of education that your child is going to receive. And that's the thing that really sticks in my craw the most about this is, I'm willing, as somebody that, that lives in Illinois. In fact, I grew up in Illinois, was gone in the military for 24 years, and then I came back because this is home. I'm willing to put up with a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of inefficiency. I'm willing to put up with just dumb high taxes. But when you are taking away my ability to control my child's education, that really just fundamentally burns me, because I've had situations, I think we've all had situations as parents where your child comes home and says, hey, we're doing this kind of off the wall thing in class, and your remedy as a parent is you either contact the teacher to ask that question, or if you can't resolve it, you have the ability to contact your school board. In my community that I live in, I have a personal relationship with at least 5 of the school board members on the Waterloo School District. I also have a personal relationship with the Waterloo superintendent, and they are accessible to me. I can call them, but they're also accountable. And what I mean by accountable is if they are not listening to parents, if they are not doing a good job, they can be voted out of office. Now, the Illinois State Board of Education is comprised of a state superintendent of schools, Dr. Ayala, who is appointed by Governor Pritzker, and then there are members of the state board who are also appointed by the governor. But we as parents have no way to reach them. I really think that one of the geniuses of our system of government is that we do give local school boards control of our kids' education. That is why I've said this repeatedly, and there are other elected officials that say this as well. Those school board elections, for my money, I believe they are among the most important elected offices that we have. And it's bad enough when the Illinois General Assembly tries to act like the Illinois Senate tries to act like a 59-member school board, but it's even worse when the Illinois State Board of Education really impacts and takes away the ability of our local school boards to influence and control our children's education.
Yes, certainly. Let me give another example before I move on to a separate issue. It even gets more interesting because one of the things that a teacher will consider is a broader modality of student assessments, in other words, grades, such as performance portfolios, essays, multiple choice. Okay, then I continue, the list goes on, and then it says including social justice work. Again, we know that that's another trigger word for activism. And it gets very, very difficult because if a child is expected to perform, under normal conditions, we're thinking about how they earn their grades, right? It's hard work. They got to take a test. They got to do the learning. But now you're talking about maybe social justice work impacting the grades. And what if a kid's not doing social justice work? Will that negatively impact the grade? And what if that social justice work goes against what that child and that maybe that family's kind of, I don't want to say political position, but overall belief system is? What happens then? Is that child forced to do something that he or she doesn't want to do just to get the grade? And I think this is what's happening is that, oftentimes, and it's already happening in high schools and probably grade schools, is kids are doing things that they don't want to do, but they know that if they don't do them, they'll offend the teacher. And so, we're compelling kids to do things that they don't believe in, and that's just wrong.
And we've had a couple questions that have come in already. One of the questions, since we're talking about what the rule says right now, a question is, if a teacher does not adhere to this new standard, will they lose their license? My understanding right now, and Ted, you can chime in, is that there's nothing written into the rule right now that specifically talks about yanking somebody's license. So I don't want to spread rumors or say stuff that just plays on people's fears. What I will say though is the question is, should the State Board of Education be wading into this political arena? Ted just mentioned, this is really the State Board of Education encouraging, teachers to really get more involved in politics and become more political. At a minimum, that isn't something that unelected bureaucrats should be deciding. I would argue that if we want to make this type of fundamental change to the way our PK through 12 education is in the state of Illinois, at a minimum, that ought to be something that the legislature votes on. But really, I wish that the legislature would just kind of step back and empower local school boards, superintendents, and parents, rather than getting into this field.
The way we've read this, and many of us have been reading it. It says the teacher will. And since I think good news is that we're being heard because they've made some changes to it. Not to say that the changes that ISB has made satisfy our concerns, but what they have come out and said is that it would be optional. Now, it clearly didn't say optional before, so I think they've made some changes to say that, which before that, it's clearly read as something that was required. And certainly, even if it's optional, if the leanings are all there, it's going to make it very difficult for teachers who don't follow these belief systems as they're written right now. It's going to scare those who have a different belief from coming in, or if they do get certified but don't believe in those things, they're going to be compelled to say things they don't believe in. And so there you bring up the question of constitutionality, because what you don't want to have is a teacher who, and kids eventually who are forced to do projects they don't believe in or that go against their values, and the same thing for teachers. So don't think that this thing won't run into the Constitution, because I think it will. Of course, if they put in all the language to try to get away from that, they can. But I think the real concern is that all this stuff is in there, all the language is in there, so they can say it's optional. They can say it's not about curriculum, it's only about certification. But I don't think that once you look at this, we're not naive. I think we know what's in there.
Well, let me touch on, when you say that it has been changed, let me explain something about how JCAR works as well. So, this is not, I touched on earlier, this is an administrative rule. This is not a piece of legislation that once it's filed or once it's, it can only be amended, and then we know exactly, what it is when it comes to a vote. This is an administrative rule where it can be changed up until the last minute, and that's not a bad thing. What happens at JCAR is after the administrative agencies go through a lengthy process to draft these rules, which that is usually a months-long process. What they are supposed to be doing is they put a draft out there, they make it open for comment from the public and stakeholders. Then they may make edits to the proposed rule based on the feedback that they've gotten. But by the time it comes to JCAR, this has been, if the process is being done correctly, this has been something that has been in the works for a number of months. Well, once they file it with JCAR for JCAR's review, they can still make changes based on the feedback that the committee members have. I used the example of the gun dealer licensing regulations. When those regulations were first filed with the committee, I got with the Illinois State Police. They testified in front of the committee hearing, and I said, look, we're going to give you more time to work this out, but I think as your rule is drafted right now, I think it violates or conflicts with the statute in 3 different areas. And then the agency took that feedback and made changes to their rule before it eventually was given the green light and approval by JCAR. So up until JCAR actually makes a decision, the administrative agencies, can be making changes to their proposed rule. And that's not something that's bad. That's how the system works. So when you mention that some of the language had been tweaked, that is the agency making a few changes in response to some concerns that either JCAR committee members had raised to them or they had just gotten feedback from the public. I know that there's another question that has been asked saying, what are the chances that this is going to pass right now? What does it look like? At the very beginning, I talked about how it's going to pass unless 8 out of 12 JCAR members say that they're willing to suspend it or strike it down. So it really, as once we finish talking about what's in the rule itself, I am going to talk a little bit about how to reach out and try to persuade the members of the committee.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's important, and you do say that it is good that ISB or any administrative group can amend what they're trying to do. I think the problem with this thing is that they may have made some small amendments, but as long as it still has things like systems of oppression and that there's a dominant culture, no, I don't think there's a tweak to this thing. I think what we need to call for is a rejection and an objection by JCAR, from 8 to the 12, saying ISB start over, or maybe keep the existing standards and tweak those a little bit. But this is overreach. It's way too much. And I want to touch on this, Paul. Like you say, people don't know what JCAR is, and most people have no reason to know. But here's what's really, really bad about this, is that these department agencies like ISB, have they been able to craft something? Wasn't the lawmakers that crafted it? It was a group. Well, ISB reached out to a bunch of other people to craft these new rules, and these rules will pass. These rules will pass unless 2/3 of do I have that right? 2/3, yeah. Unless 2/3 of the JCAR of the 12 members object. But if it's a simple majority that objects, it passes. And so
Right.
the barrier has made it really tough on taxpayers, because we've got to reach out to this JCAR group that we know nothing about and say, hey, we need 2/3 of you, which is a supermajority, to turn it down. And that is super unfair to us. And the more I dig into this, the more that I want to make that a bigger deal, because we're at a huge disadvantage as taxpayers, as ordinary residents. How can we fight this, especially when it's a 6-6 Democrat-Republican? And to the extent that the Democrats would support this kind of language, I would hope that at least 2 of them don't. And again, for the same reason, they shouldn't want to politicize our classrooms. And I don't want to sound naive, but I do want to think that 2 out of the 6 wouldn't want that. But we should not have rules coming from an administrative body. God knows who they are. God knows who they asked to do this. And these rules come down, and JCAR has to get a 2/3 opposition to block it. Otherwise, it just becomes the standards in our classrooms. These are our classrooms. What happened to our? We pay local taxes. We pay massive local taxes in Illinois. What happens to our vote as to what we, how we manage our schools at the local level? It's gone. It's gone because these rules come top down from some unelected bureaucrats, and it's just flat out wrong.
Well, unfortunately, this is a trend that we are seeing in our nationwide politics right now, in terms of, and I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat. I mean, it seems like the executives in both parties have been doing it. I know that when President Obama was president, at one point, his famous line was, he was like, "I've got a pen and a phone. I'm gonna make changes." President Trump, to his credit, I did think, at one point he had said, that I want to start paring back some of these rules. One of the Supreme Court justices that he appointed, Justice Gorsuch, this is a huge issue for Justice Gorsuch. Just the expansion of the administrative state, and then now with President Biden, signing, a record number of executive orders, when he came in, agree with it, disagree with it, everybody should be concerned, because, when you're governing by administrative rule, it takes away your voice as a citizen, because your voice is told, in theory, you are represented by whoever you elect. In Illinois, it's your representative or your state senator, but they have the ability, if this goes through a legislative process, they have the ability to ask questions. They can make your concerns a part of the record. And really, the idea that we're going to govern our state via just administrative rules and executive orders is something that should be very troubling to anybody, regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum, because it's certainly, we're not going to have a Democratic governor forever. At some point, there is going to be a Republican governor in Illinois, and the precedent is being set, where the governor can just ignore the legislature. So, we do need to, be concerned about this, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, because, when you have administrative agencies that are taking broad authority, they are disenfranchising you as a citizen. The way, we talked a little bit about how you can try to, we have to, if you don't want this rule to pass, or say you do want it to pass and you want to influence, the members of JCAR, I think there's really two good ways that you have to go about doing that. First of all, you do need to send emails. I wish it wasn't this way, but elected officials do keep track of how many emails they receive. And I've heard my counterparts say, well, I haven't been getting any emails about this issue, so that must mean that people don't care about it. So it is important to send the members of JCAR an email letting them know, that you don't think that this rule from the Illinois State Board of Education is the right way to go about doing business. Another more important manner that I think you can try to persuade them is try to work through people that they are going to be listening to. What I mean by that is each senator represents about 200,000 registered voters. Each representative represents about 100,000 registered voters. That's the way our legislative districts are drawn up in Illinois. Well, you don't have time as an elected official to talk to 100,000 constituents. You don't even really have time to talk to just like even 500. That will overwhelm you. But the people that you will make time to take a phone call from are your local experts, which would be the presidents of your local school boards and your superintendents. When I was a sitting state senator, all my superintendents in my district had my personal cell phone number. They were not shy at all about calling me up and letting me know if they thought something, a bill that related to education was a bad idea. So elected officials are going to take the calls from the superintendents. They're going to take the calls from the school board presidents. So if you're not happy about this rule, I would encourage you, get on the phone with your school board president, get on the phone with your superintendent, one of those local education leaders that you have a personal relationship with, and urge that person to get in contact with the JCAR members as well.
Yeah, what Paul says is really important. I think I want to reiterate a little bit my disappointment on the whole thing, because our children are our most precious thing. I mean, I can't think of anything more precious, and most families will say the same. And yet on this issue, as you hear about this, and it may upset you, for those that it doesn't upset, well, it's not a big deal. But for those who are upset, who do you call? Because your legislator isn't engaged in this. It's a bunch of rulemakers. JCAR doesn't really decide whether they like these rules or not. They're deciding more on the law and whether it matches the law. So hopefully we can shake their thoughts about it. But ISB, the State Board of Education, is the one doing that. But they're not elected officials, so they don't respond to us. So Paul is right, and unfortunately, you've got to be an activist in this. And it's sending emails. And don't overthink the emails. It's just a simple message. I don't like this. It's not right for me. Whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a super constructed message. Just express your displeasure in a professional, respectful way. But don't hesitate to reach out to ISB. Reach out to JCAR. Paul's right. Reach out to the people you know. And eventually, if enough of us speak, hopefully we can be listened to. It's an uphill challenge, given the vote and the way it works, but this is our voice, and this is our state, and these are our children. These are our schools. We pay for them. We pay for them a lot. So if we don't speak up, it's on us.
And the other place that I would also make some contacts is I would encourage everybody to also contact Governor Pritzker's office as well. I mean, this is Governor Pritzker's rule. This is not a bill that was filed by a member of the General Assembly. The person who is driving the ship on the State Board of Education is the State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Carmen Ayala. She is a political appointee. Governor Pritzker appointed her. She is having conversations with him. She is answering, she answers to him. Governor Pritzker does pay attention to polling. Unfortunately, I wish he was, more grounded by whether or not something's going to be a good idea rather than looking at public opinion polls. But it is important to reach out to the governor's office as well, because if his staff believes that this is becoming a political liability for him, he will have the State Board of Education pull the plug on this rule. That has happened in the past. Sometimes the administration will pull a rule back, and it never even gets a vote on. That can happen at any time up until the JCAR meeting. The State Board of Education could say, you know what, we're just going to withdraw this rule, and we don't want it to even come to a vote. So it is important to, in addition to reaching out to the JCAR members, reaching out to your local education leaders, it's also important to reach out to Governor Pritzker's office as well, because this is his rule. This is not something that came through the Illinois General Assembly. This came through, his state superintendent of schools, and we need to make that clear as well. And if the governor believes that this is hurting him politically, this rule will disappear very, very quickly.
I want to add one fact, Paul, before I forget. And it'd be one thing if we had excellent teaching results, excellent results from our kids in Illinois schools. But if you were to go to the Illinois report card, it's the ISB's report card on the state, Illinois report card. And you can find it as a state snapshot. And you can find the results, the student results, the academic results. And in there you can get all kinds of different levels. 3rd through 8th grade, for example, preparedness for reading, English language arts, and preparedness for math. And for 3rd through 8th grade, nearly 2/3 of students in Illinois don't meet the requirements. 2/3, right? So, and then if you go and look at the SATs, nearly 2/3 don't meet requirements. So what you're talking about distracting kids who struggle with math and reading and English. You're distracting them, and you're getting them away from critical thinking, and you're moving them towards activism and some kind of political thinking, rather than becoming the most prepared they can be for life and for working and for jobs. And it's just a backwards way of doing things. And again, I don't care what side you're on. You don't want this for your kids. You want your kids to be prepared, coming out and competing with other states, right? Because the other states are putting out people into the workforce. We should be trying to put out the best kids we can, who are the most prepared, who are critical thinkers, and really good at English, math, and science. And that's not what these new rules are about. These new rules are about something totally different.
And we had a question come in asking if people, a question was, should we contact the members of the State Board of Education as well? And I would say that certainly cannot hurt. I would, you are able to, if you go to the State Board of Education website, you can find the names of the individuals that serve on the State Board of Education. It doesn't hurt to contact them. It doesn't hurt to contact the governor, and it certainly helps to contact the JCAR members. I do want to reemphasize something that Ted said. Be respectful. There's one of the problems that we have in our society is just the level of toxicity that we have right now is such that we cannot have a rational political discussion about why something is a bad idea, without it escalating. And if talking as a former elected official, I often told my constituents, I said, look, it makes me a better state senator to hear from my constituents who disagree with me. One of the things that I learned back, a long time ago, I studied mechanical engineering, and one of the things that I learned as an engineering student is you have to, if you're going to understand the magnitude and nature of a problem, you have to be able to look at it from two different perspectives. And that's true in life. We have to be able to look at stuff from different perspectives. We need each other in our different political perspectives. So I always welcomed feedback from somebody that disagreed with me as long as it was respectful. But as soon as somebody got into name calling, or I was called a misogynist, or said that I did this, I immediately just deleted the email, and I wouldn't open up any more email from that person ever again. Because your time as an elected official is precious. You have a very limited amount to interact with the hundreds of thousands of constituents that you represent. And if somebody is going to resort to name calling, they just self-edit themselves out of the conversation. So that's why I say, I agree with Ted when he says be respectful. Now, I think what is important to emphasize, and this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of JCAR being a process committee, not a policy committee. I think it's important that you need to make the arguments in terms of this is not how the process is supposed to work. I'm opposed to this because I feel like it impinges upon the responsibilities of the legislature. I think that this also takes away from the ability of local elected officials to influence my child's education. I think you really have to make those process arguments rather than just saying, well, I disagree with the politics of this, because it's not a political committee. It's a process committee. But what is going to be responsive with the JCAR members is when you say, look, this is outside the box of reasonableness. This is not how our system is supposed to work. This agency, the Illinois State Board of Education, is taking away your responsibility, your prerogative as an elected official to pass this type of legislation. That's what I think is going to be very persuasive to the members of JCAR, not just saying, well, I disagree with progressive politics, so I'm opposed to this rule.
But Paul and I aren't saying don't tell them, don't hold back on what you think. Tell them what you think. Tell them, I agree with everything Paul just said, but you don't have to beat around the bush. You can speak strongly, directly. Just don't be nasty and don't be disrespectful. So that's one. Now, I want to make sure that people know it, that at wirepoints.org, on the piece that we wrote, the 9 things to know about Illinois' pending culturally responsive K through 12 teaching mandate, we have the list, the email addresses of all the JCAR members. We have the address to ISB that you can also include there. So, of course, I think what we'll do is we'll add a few more names to it. We'll amend and add some of the ISB, key ISB people. And of course, you'll all have to individually find your school board members, and I think that's a good route to go.
And let me talk a little bit about just how if you are interested in this, you've contacted your local education officials, you've contacted JCAR, or not JCAR, you've contacted the members of JCAR, you've contacted the state board of education, you've contacted Governor Pritzker's office, and you want to see how this is going to play out. When you go to try to follow the JCAR meeting on the 16th of February, there will be a link where it's going to be live streamed. But I do want to manage expectations a little bit. Most of what JCAR does is behind closed doors. You know, in this case, there are going to be some committee members that are going to be asking questions, I'm sure. But usually, how JCAR works is the meeting is maybe scheduled for noon, and there's a pre-committee meeting that is usually scheduled for half an hour beforehand. And what often happens is that pre-committee meeting is really where the JCAR members themselves are trying to discuss stuff and come to a consensus. JCAR, I mentioned it's a process committee, not a policy committee, but it's also one where we do try to find solutions. And a lot of times on a contentious issue, there may be a closed door pre-meeting that lasts for a number of hours. The very first time that Governor Pritzker, his Illinois Department of Public Health, pushed a rule that was going to attach criminal penalties to some of his pandemic executive orders, that was something where we had a closed door meeting that was hours long beforehand. I was able to to convince some of the Democrats that rule was a bad idea, because I was able to go through the statutory provisions that were already on the books and say, look, here's how the governor's executive order just flat out conflicts with what is in statute already. And then ultimately, the Democratic JCAR members were able to convince the Pritzker administration to pull to pull that rule back. So if you're looking at watching the JCAR meeting, that's coming up on February 16th, I can almost guarantee that the hearing will not start on time. It may be delayed by a substantial length of time, and then there's not going to be a huge, robust debate between the members of the committee arguing with each other. Those arguments are going to be made behind closed doors before the committee hearing even starts. And then when it comes time to actually vote on these standards, what will happen is a member, somebody who is opposed to the standards will make a motion saying, I move, that this rule be suspended. And then the vote will be a yes vote, to suspend the rule. So the people that are voting yes will be voting against the rule at JCAR. So that's a little bit tricky, but I did just want to explain that if you do decide to try to tune in, and watch whatever happens on the 16th.
Turning down, Pritzker's executive, whatever term you put on it, those rules that would have criminalized some of that behavior. But it's a great example that JCAR can act and object against bad rules. We'd just like to see that repeated again right now. Just object to these rules, and let's start over.
No, and I think that is a possibility, because in my experience in the Illinois Capitol, as a senator for 4 years, there were some knuckleheads, in both parties who are grandstanding demagogues. Okay, but by and large, most of the folks that are up in Springfield, both the elected officials and the staff, are trying to do what they believe is the right thing. And of the members of JCAR, we have almost everybody on that committee, and I'm not gonna name names and make enemies, but most everybody on that committee is what I would call a conscientious and a thoughtful legislator. Where they will listen. We have been able to have discussions. And evidence of that is, the fact that, that Governor Pritzker's first attempt to criminalize violations of his executive order, so that JCAR did reject it. So, this is not, a foregone conclusion. It's difficult to get 8 out of 12 members, but it's not impossible. And I do think I do think that that the members of that committee will listen and they will respond to advocacy.
And I think these rules, as you say, these rules way overstep the bounds of what any legislation was created by the legislators. I doubt anything in there says let's politicize our classrooms, let's bring in all kinds of social justice activism type language. That maybe once we do that, maybe when the politics switch, the other side would bring in their side of the politics, and we just play political football with our kids. That is not what this law was intended to do, and these rules obviously it's an overreach, and it has to be rejected. So we believe that those families who feel that way, and again, I say I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on, you don't want this for our classrooms, and we should just be opposing it. Reach out to your legislator, reach out to ISB, reach out to the JCAR members, reach out to your board members. It's putting a burden on you, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's the reality right now. Otherwise, I think these bad rules, you've heard me talk about this a lot, anybody who's following Wire Points. You hear us talking about how we're losing record number of people. We've shrunk more than any state in the country since 2010. Nobody is losing people like Illinois. We don't need bad rules to chase out even more people. And again, it's already too expensive to live here. There's not enough good paying jobs. Our governments are too corrupt. The last thing we need to do is make our schools even worse. So this is, I implore all of you to reach out and do what you can. Let's see what happens.
Well, I will take that as your last word, Ted. I will do a closing comment as well. There was one question that was submitted. It probably was from somebody that supports the rules, and it was asking, what part of the rules do I like? I certainly am not opposed to teachers attempting to understand students and their backgrounds. That is part of being a good teacher. But I will note, though, we're not talking about saying that local school districts cannot try to make sure that teachers understand their students. This would be a different discussion, if this was something that local school boards were pushing, because I believe that local school districts can respond to parents. But if you're supportive of these rules, my question for you would be, why, how are these different and necessary compared to what we already have? Take a look at what's already on there, because the current rules already do a lot to make sure that students are understood and that teachers are trying to be, trying to represent all viewpoints. That's already in there. This is a push to make these rules more political, and it's being done by the State Board of Education. This is being done by unelected bureaucrats. This is not being done by local school districts, local school boards who are accessible and accountable to you as a parent. So anyway, we're out of time. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you, Ted, for joining me. And everybody, I encourage you to be involved. Be civil, be respectful, but be involved.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.